When I saw the clown holding up his document and beckoning me into his hut, I couldn't resist. My name is Madison Carter, and you might think that my life is like that of any woman my age. I'm 34 years old, a teacher in Elmwood, a town in Missouri where routine is almost as unchanging as the blue sky on summer mornings. I live in a modest house with my husband, Paul, who is 36 and works as a manager in a building materials store. We have a yard with a white picket fence and an ancient oak tree which, according to the former owner, was there even before the town got its name. Sounds like the perfect setting, doesn't it? But to me, it always seemed empty. Elmwood is one of those towns where everything seems to be suspended in time. The main streets are lined with small family-run stores, Mrs. Hartman's Bakery, Mr. Jonas's hardware store, and Janet's beauty salon. Who knows all the secrets of the town's women, or at least pretends not to hear when the gossip happens. The church clock chimes every hour, even though most of us are so used to the sound that we hardly notice it. All this should be comforting, but instead, I always feel as if something is missing. My routine is as predictable as the hands of a clock. I wake up at 6, make coffee while Paul is still in the shower, read the news on my cell phone, and leave for school. There, I spend the day teaching math and English to children who sometimes challenge me more than they should. After school, I go to the supermarket, buy something for dinner, and return home. Paul arrives around 7, tired and generally distracted. We have dinner together, talk about his work, the projects at the store, and then watch something on TV until sleep overcomes us. I could spend the rest of my life like this, but lately I've been feeling like something is suffocating me. It's not that I don't love Paul. He's a good, kind man, and he does everything to ensure that we have a stable life, but I can't help feeling that, somewhere along the way, I've lost myself. Maybe it's the guilt of having become too complacent, of never taking a risk, of always choosing the safe path. Then, on that hot Friday in July, when the traveling circus Starlight Show came to town, something inside me woke up. I remember what it was like to hear the rumors for the first time. The children at school talking about the colorful posters that had suddenly appeared on lampposts and shop windows. The adults commenting in line at the market about how it had been years since a circus had last passed through. At first, I didn't take much notice, but deep down, an unexpected curiosity began to emerge. That evening, Paul was busy organizing the store's inventory, so I decided to go alone. The last time I'd been to a circus, I must have been about 10 years old. The parking lot was a dirt field, lit only by the flashing lights of the cotton candy and popcorn stands. There was a mixture of smells in the air: caramelized sugar, barbecue smoke, and dry summer grass. The sound of children's laughter and the vibrant music coming from the speakers filled the room, creating an almost magical atmosphere. When I entered the huge red tent, I was overcome by a wave of nostalgia. The stands were packed with families, young couples, and teenagers. The lights flashed to the rhythm of the music as the artists prepared on stage. There was something mesmerizing about the controlled chaos of that place, as if, for a few hours, all the rules of the outside world ceased to exist. It was there that I saw it for the first time. Among the jugglers and acrobats, there was a clown. His makeup was simple, but his movements were so exaggerated and theatrical that it was impossible to look away. He had a different energy, something that seemed to attract everyone in the audience, as if he were telling a story that only a few of us could understand. When he looked in my direction, I swear that for a second, I felt as if everything else had disappeared. It was as if he knew I was there, as if he could see something that even I didn't understand. After the show, while most people headed for the exits, I sat for a few minutes, soaking up the moment. When I finally got up, I decided to take a walk around the stalls. That's when, unexpectedly, the clown, still wearing some makeup on his face, but without the wig or the red nose, appeared in front of me. "Did you enjoy the show?" he asked, smiling in a way that seemed sincere, but also full of something else, something I couldn't identify. I smiled back, feeling my heart racing in a way it hadn't for years. "It was incredible," I replied, and it was true. Maybe it was the show, or maybe it was him. But for a brief moment, I felt as if something inside me was changing. And that night, as I drove home, I realized that the circus had left more than memories in Elmwood. It had left a question that I didn't know if I was ready to answer. The week after my first visit to the circus was strangely restless. At work, I explained fractions to the children while my mind wandered to the image of that clown, Ethan, or Harlequin, as he introduced himself. I tried to justify my fascination by telling myself it was just curiosity, but I knew better. He had something I couldn't define, something that seemed to illuminate a dormant part of me. The following Friday, when Paul stayed late at work, I made an impulsive decision. I drove to the field where the circus was still set up, drawn as if something was pulling me there. The night was clear, and the lights of the tents shone like stars on the horizon. The smell of sweet popcorn and sawdust, mixed with the vibrant sound of music, created an almost magical atmosphere. Before I even entered the tent, I saw Ethan in the distance. He had some of his makeup still on his face, entertaining a group of children with magic tricks. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with recognition, and a crooked smile formed on his lips. He walked towards me with the confidence of someone who knew the effect he had on people. "You're back," he said, as if he knew I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist, I confessed, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding. He suggested I go backstage, and before I could think, I was following him beyond the curtains. Backstage, everything was an organized mess. Costumes hanging on makeshift racks, performers hurriedly getting ready, and the smell of makeup mixed with sawdust. Ethan showed me the less glamorous corners of the show, but contrary to what I thought, that only made it more fascinating. "It's chaotic, but it's freedom," he said, looking at me as if trying to guess my thoughts. His closeness made me tense up in a way I hadn't felt for years. When we finally said goodbye, he held my hand for a moment and said, "Come back tomorrow." His voice was soft but firm, as if he already knew my answer. That night, as I drove home, I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement. Paul was already asleep when I arrived, and I sat on the sofa staring into the void. For the first time in a long time, I realized that something inside me was changing, and maybe I was ready to find out what it was. The next night came too quickly. I spent the day thinking about Ethan and what he had said. Going back to the circus seemed insane, but I couldn't help it. It was as if something other than me was making the decisions. Then, as night fell, I found myself driving back to that dirt field, with the lights flashing in the distance like a beacon guiding me. The circus was less crowded this time. It was a quieter night, without the euphoria of the premiere. The smell of sweet popcorn and barbecue still dominated the air, and the muffled sound of music echoed from inside the tent. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I approached. It wasn't the hot summer wind that was causing it, but the anticipation. I knew something was about to happen, something that would change my life forever. Ethan was waiting for me near the entrance, leaning against a wooden post, the lights flashing in a rhythm above him. He was wearing worn-out jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves folded up to his elbows. There were still traces of the clown's makeup around his eyes, as if he wanted to keep one foot in that fantastic world he inhabited. "You really came," he said, with a smile that looked more like a challenge. "You asked me to come," I replied, trying to sound confident, but my voice gave away my hesitation. He laughed, a low, amused sound. "I thought you might change your mind." Then, without waiting for an answer, he held out his hand to me. "Come on, I want to show you something." This time, backstage at the circus seemed different. It wasn't just the controlled chaos I'd seen before. Now everything seemed more intimate. Yellowish lights illuminated the path as we passed performers putting on makeup in front of tarnished mirrors with flickering light bulb frames. The wooden floor creaked under our footsteps, and the sound of distant laughter and off-key instruments filled the air. Ethan took me to a more secluded corner where the commotion seemed to die down. It was a kind of storage room, with costumes hanging on makeshift racks and scenery stacked on the sides. There, the smell of fresh paint mixed with sawdust, creating a unique atmosphere. He took a chair and sat down facing me. nodding for me to do the same. "Why did you really come back, Madison?" he asked, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His voice was soft but direct, as if he knew exactly how I felt, but wanted to hear it from me. I hesitated. I could say that I was just curious, that I wanted to see more of the circus, but that wouldn't be true. "I don't know," I finally answered. "Maybe because I feel that it's different here, that you're different." He smiled sideways, and his eyes sparkled in the dim light. "Different can be good, or it can be dangerous. Which one do you think I am?" "Maybe both," I said, without thinking. It was an answer that seemed to come straight from my heart, without filters or hesitation. Ethan stood up slowly and took a few steps towards me. When he stopped, I was so close that I could feel the warmth of his presence. Life is full of choices, Madison. Some lead us to what we know, others show us something completely new. Before I could reply, he leaned over and took my face in his hands. His skin was warm and rough against mine, and his eyes seemed to be searching for something I didn't even know I had. Then, without warning, he kissed me. It was an intense kiss, full of urgency and something deeper that I couldn't quite pinpoint. It was as if he was trying to show me a whole world in a single moment. My hands trembled as I touched his shoulders, but at the same time I felt something inside me calm down, as if something was finally in the right place. When he pulled away, the world seemed to slow down. He still held my face, but his gaze was softer now, almost vulnerable. "You don't belong here, Madison," he said, almost in a whisper. "But you don't belong in the world you left behind either. You're caught between two worlds, and only you can decide where you're going." His words echoed in my mind as we made our way back to the rest of the circus. He kept walking beside me, but now there was a comfortable silence between us, as if whatever needed to be said had already been said. As we approached the exit, he took my hand and held it for a moment, his fingers firm against mine. "It doesn't have to end here," he said. He led me to a corner where we finished what we had started that night. I came home feeling like I was floating. The world seemed different, more alive, but also more confusing. Paul was in the living room, watching television, and greeted me with a distracted nod. I mumbled something about being tired and went upstairs to the bedroom, where I sat on the bed and stared into the void. As much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew that something had changed in me. Something that couldn't be undone. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what my next move would be. Paul had already turned off the lights in the living room, but a sliver of light escaped from under the bedroom door. I felt the weight of everything that had happened at the circus hanging over me, as if the world around me was divided into two distinct realities. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my feet. When I opened the door, Paul was lying on the bed, his face turned to the wall. He didn't even move when I entered, and this only reinforced the growing distance between us. I tried to ignore the guilt that began to creep in, but it was no use. I changed my clothes in silence and lay down next to him, feeling the coldness of the empty space between us. On the outside, my life was still intact, but on the inside, everything was falling apart. The next day, I went to school as usual. The children were excited, as they always are on Fridays, but my heart was heavy. Every laugh, every sound of chairs dragging seemed to amplify the chaos that was unfolding inside me. Everything felt like a reminder of how much my life was stuck in a soulless routine. I felt like a stranger in my own world. At the end of the day, as I collected papers and erased the board, I realized that my mind could only think of Ethan. It was as if he had lit a fire in me, something I couldn't put out. His voice echoed in my head. "You're caught between two worlds." He was right. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to keep everything as it was, the comfort of a stable, predictable life. The other part yearned for something new, something unpredictable, something that only Ethan seemed to offer. When evening came, I knew what I had to do. Driving to the circus for the third time was different. The air was heavier, charged with the promise of something inevitable. The lights flashed as if inviting me in, and the smell of popcorn and sawdust was more familiar now, almost comforting. I passed through the entrance and walked backstage, as if I were already part of that world. Ethan was there, sitting on a makeshift chair, playing with the deck of cards that never seemed to leave his hands. When he saw me, he immediately stood up, his carefree smile giving way to a more serious expression. "I knew you'd come," he said, crossing his arms. "But I still don't know what you want." I was silent for a moment, staring at him. The chaos around the backstage area seemed distant, as if there were only the two of us. "I don't know," I finally confessed, "but I know I can't go on as I am." Ethan took a step towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. "Then why don't you do something about it? Leave everything behind. Come with me." His words hit me like a blow. The simplicity with which he said it was almost cruel. He made it sound so easy, as if my whole life could be abandoned without consequences. But at the same time, it was tempting. So tempting. "Ethan, I can't just run away," I said, my voice laced with confusion. "My life, my husband, everything I've built. We can do it all in secret if you accept." "Of course I accept," he said firmly, his voice firm. "And so we have lived this madness to this day. It's not over yet. Click on the cards and continue with us."